Hi, everyone. Welcome to this event. I'm going to share our handy dandy slideshow just so everyone knows where we are. You are happily at today's first of two from the Archives events at the 2021 Agnes Scott Writers Festival. Yesterday's look back at the 2013 question and answer session featuring Gish Jen, Christina Garcia, and Angel Rashida Ahmad was so fun. And the reading last night from Agnes Scott student finalists in the Writers Festival contest was absolutely incredible. Thank you for being with us. My name is Nicole Stammet, and I'm Associate Professor and Chair of English at Agnes Scott College. As the Writers Festival commemorates its 50th anniversary, we wanted to look back at some of the amazing events that have taken place at Writers Festivals over the years. In commemorating this occasion all week long, we are very excited to hear from returning guests, poet Rita Dove and playwright Jacqueline Goldfinger, class of 2000, tomorrow. You can see our full schedule of Writers Festival events here. Upcoming festival events can all be accessed via calendar.agnescott.edu. We also hope you'll take a look at Karis Books' virtual book booth, which has information about how to purchase some of the works featured this week. We hope you'll join us again in just a couple of hours at 4 o'clock when we host the amazing writer Melissa Fay Green, who is currently Kirk Distinguished Writer in Residence at Agnes Scott, as she looks back at her own Writers Festival appearance. Then grab a quick bite of dinner before we reconvene at 6:30. We hope you'll be able to join us as we feature the poet Tiana Clark during her Georgia Poetry Circuit event. Right now, we are going to look back at Rita Dove's 1992 Writers Festival appearance. As our returning guest, she'll be speaking tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. In the meantime, though, we wanted to share her original Writers Festival appearance. When I start the video, you will see Dr. Peggy Thompson, Professor of English Emeritus at Agnes Scott College, who provides the introduction. Keep in mind, it is a video from 1991, so the audio is maybe not as great as it is these days. We hope you enjoy.
Tomorrow morning at 10:25. We hope many of you will take advantage of this opportunity to hear one of our most exciting fiction writers read from his work. And now to tonight's reader. I like to think of Rita Dove as a young poet because she's my age. But when I reviewed her resume this week, I realized that she has already had a career any writer twice her age proud to call a life's work. Currently a professor of English and creative writing at the University of Virginia, Rita Dove has published several critically acclaimed volumes of poetry, as well as essays, short stories, and very soon, a novel. She is a highly regarded editor, literary judge, and speaker. And she has received an impressive array of prizes, fellowships, and awards, bearing all the prestigious titles, among them Fulbright, Mellon, Guggenheim, Rockefeller, and even the lofty Pulitzer. There is, of course, never an adequate way to account for such success. But as my students and I discussed Rita Dove's poetry in recent weeks, two of its qualities struck me again and again. The first is her intense appreciation of language. Every word in her poetry demands and repays attention. Nothing is wasted, not even the silences. Indeed, Rita Dove's poetry gains power in its very restraint, a power available only to those writers who trust and respect the language they use. Equally intense is Dove's appreciation of the truth, especially the strange human truth that resists rational comprehension. Truths about our grotesque cruelty, absurd inequities, haunting memories, elusive dreams. The list could go on and on, but don't worry, it won't. Instead, I simply and proudly present to you now a poet of uncommon truth and beauty, Rita Dove.
Thank you. Can you hear me all? Up above, down below? Is that fine? Okay. I thank you for that wonderful introduction. It was short but incredibly sweet, and so I really thank you for that. I also wanted to say that it gives me pleasure to be here at Agnes Scott. Finally, we've been trying to get this together for several years, and also to be in the company of such fine writers. John Stone, whose work I've admired for many years. Greg Johnson, whose work was new to me but won't remain strange to me any longer for many, many years to come. And also Bob Coover, who I last saw over a wonderful mozzarella in Berlin a couple of years ago, so it's good to renew an old acquaintance there. I'd like to start with a poem that I hadn't intended to read, but wanted to because of the readings that occurred this afternoon. John described with great relish that musical symbol, the fermata, the hold sign, and it reminded me of a poem that appears in my first book, which is not about music, but is about language and is about symbols that stand for language, for meanings. And this poem is a single word. It's one letter, but this letter is a word in Swedish, which is sort of like a completed fermata, I guess. It's an O with two dots over it, and the two dots are called an umlaut in Germanic languages. You'll learn how to pronounce this word at the beginning of the sentence, but it's at the beginning of the poem, sorry, but it's one of those felicitous moments, I think, in language where the symbol is so perfect. I mean, it's so perfect for the word that no explanation seems to be necessary. Of course, it's not about language, it's about writing and about everything else too. Shape the lips to an O, say A. That's island. One word of Swedish has changed the whole neighborhood. When I look up, the yellow house on the corner is a galleon stranded in flowers. Around it, the wind. Even the high roar of a leaf mulcher could be the horn blast from a ship as it skirts the misted shoals. We don't need much more to keep things going. Families complete themselves and refuse to budge from the present. The present extends its glass forehead to see backyard breezes, scattered cardinals. And if one evening the house on the corner took off over the marshland, neither I nor my neighbor would be amazed. Sometimes a word is found so right it trembles at the slightest explanation. You start out with one thing, end up with another, and nothing's like it used to be, not even the future. That's a description of the Midwest, which has its own subtle beauty, and it's not as flamboyant as Atlanta or Decatur is right now. Though I've heard that the dogwoods have suffered a bit because of the cold. Still, to me, it seems pretty incredible. My grandparents came north from the south. In fact, my father was born not far from here in Rockmart, Georgia, and came up when he was a young child. My mother's family came up from D.C. and from Tennessee. And the story, basically, of my maternal grandparents is a story that appears in Thomas of Beulah. I've often said when journalists try to pin me down and ask me what, try to find out what in the book is true about my grandparents, I often say it's loosely based on their lives. The emotional heart of the book is true, but some of the facts have been changed, sometimes to protect the innocent, and sometimes because the line was better if I changed it. So, and now I can't even tell sometimes what was true or not. But I will tell you a couple of things. One of them was that indeed I decided to have my grandmother be born in Rockmart, though she was actually born in Washington, D.C., but it was nicer, so I did that. And a few confessions here. And also my grandmother's name was not Beulah. My grandfather's was Thomas. My grandmother's was Georgiana, and I changed it because Georgiana does not fit in a poetic line. It just doesn't, it takes over. It's a name that takes over. And sort of like my grandmother did too when she was But Beulah was the name with more echoes in it. And that's why that was a very conscious artistic choice. But the story that began the entire book was true, and was told to me by my grandmother pretty much as it appears in this first poem. It was indeed the poem that began the entire book, though I wasn't sure I was going to write a book. I thought I was going to be able to write one or two poems and get out of there as fast as possible. Just goes to show you never know until you do it. It's a story about my grandfather coming up the Mississippi River as part of a song and a dance team as a young man before he had met my grandmother, and how he, the event that happened changed his life. The event. Ever since they'd left the Tennessee Ridge with nothing to boast of but good looks and a mandolin, the two Negroes leaning on the rail of a riverboat were inseparable. Lem plucked to Thomas's silver falsetto. But the night was hot and they were drunk. They spat where the wheel churned mud and moonlight. They called to the tarantulas down among the bananas to come out and dance. "You're so fine and mighty. Let's see what you can do," said Thomas, pointing to a tree-capped island. Lem stripped, spoke easy. "Them's chestnuts, I believe." Dove quick as a gas. Thomas, dry on deck, saw the green crown shake as the island slipped under, dissolved in the thickening stream. At his feet, a stinking circle of rags, the half-shell mandolin. Where the wheel turned, the water gently shirred. When my grandmother finished that story, I was 14 when she told it to me, and I was full of questions. I wanted to know what my grandfather felt like after his friend had drowned. I also wanted to know how an island could sink, and just like that. And she simply said, "Well, that's the way the story goes, and that's, what are you doing questioning my story?" And so I was left to either accept it on its own terms, or to question it. But the magic of it was really too strong, and that's why I decided that the only way to find out more was to write about it, and certainly was to enter the story myself, or to try to slip into the skin, under the skin of my grandfather and see what it felt like at that moment. And when I got to the end of this poem, when I'd finished writing and rewriting it, I realized that he would pick up the mandolin, that was the one thing left of his friend that he would have to pick up. Jiving. This poem has a reference to tater bugs. If you know what a tater bug is, well, I hope you don't know what a tater bug is, but a tater bug is a slang for potato bug, and refers to a mandolin because the back of a mandolin is rounded and striped, has the same colors as a potato bug. Jiving. Heading north, straw hat cocked on the back of his head, tight curls gleaming with brilliantine. He didn't stop until the nights of Chaw and River Bright had retreated somehow into another's life. He landed in Akron, Ohio, 1921, on the dingy beach of a man-made lake. Since what he'd been through, he was always jiving, gold hoop from the right ear jiggling, and a glass stud, bright blue, in his left. The young ladies saying, "He sure plays that tater bug like the devil," sighing their sighs and dimpling. I had written about 6 poems, and they were all about my grandfather when I realized that this was going to be larger than what I had imagined it to be. At that point, I had not started writing any poems about my grandmother, and they began to sneak up in very curious ways, and I wasn't sure that they were all going to fit together until I was pretty deep into the book, and then I realized I had to write myself out the other end. I don't know if I would have had the nerve to take on 2 lives, to write about 2 lives like this if it hadn't occurred just that way. And so the need, and actually the obligation in a way, to honor the emotional truth of their lives led me through the book. I had to make a decision fairly early on then, whether I was going to alternate poems or whether I was going to have one section be for my grandfather and one section for my grandmother. And I decided to keep the sections separate. Several reasons. One of them was that just as in anyone's life, no matter how close you are to another person, different things are important to you. And if you know someone or you've been living with someone for many, many years and you start talking about certain events, you realize you have really radically different takes on them. And something that you might have thought was pretty minuscule was tantamount in someone else's life. So I thought that would be untrue to the way they lived their lives and the things that were important to them. The other reason was also that I wanted to give my grandmother the last word. That's why the section laughs. But what I'm going to do now is not read them in that sequence, not read only the Thomas poems and then Beulah's poems, but to alternate a bit so that you can see the chronology as it moves through the years. This poem is called Summit Beach, 1921. It's a complement to Jiving, the one that I just read, Beulah's version of this. It's not in Thomas and Beulah. It's in Grace Notes, and the reason why it's in Grace Notes is because the poem wouldn't finish itself. Greg mentioned today about people who talk about poems writing themselves, and I agree with him. And when someone says that, you think, gosh, how obnoxious. But there is a point where I think after all the work that goes into the writing and rewriting of a poem or a story or anything else, there's a point where it takes off, and then things seem to fit together. And that's the most incredible feeling in the world. I think that's the one that keeps me writing. But this poem didn't do that for a long time. And finally, I decided that I was going to publish a book about it. We didn't need it, forget it. And as soon as the book was out, it happened. So here it is. Summit Beach, 1921. The Negro beach jumped to the twitch of an oil drum tattoo and a mandolin, sweaters flying off the finest brown shoulders this side of the world. She sat by the fire, shawl moored by a single fake cameo. She was cold, thank you. She did not care to dance, the scar on her knee winking with the evening chill. Papa had said, "Don't be so fast, you're all you've got." So she refused to cut the wing, though she let the boys bring her sassafras tea and drank it down neat as a dropped hanky. Her knee had itched in the cast till she grew mean from bravery. She could wait. She was gold. When the right man smiled, it would be music skittering up her calf like a chuckle. She could feel the breeze in her ears like water, like the air as a child when she climbed Papa's shed and stepped off the tin roof into blue with her parasol and invisible wings. Finally got written. So they meet at that beach, that segregated beach, and get married. And Thomas, to give you, I can't read you everything, but Thomas, just to give you a sense of what one of the threads that connects his life from that fateful event on the Mississippi until its end, is that he feels that in some way when he picked up that mandolin, he's also picked up Lem's life, or let's say the responsibility for Lem's life. And Lem, his drowned friend, appears at various times in his life. This is one moment like that. This poem is called The Zeppelin Factory. Akron, Ohio was the rubber capital of the world. I suppose it still is, though all the rubber factories are in Arizona now. And that was a big joke when we were kids, the rubber factory. But it was also the Zeppelin capital of the world. Blimps, airships were all began with Goodyear Aerospace. And the hangars that they had to build to make Zeppelins were so large that they had their own weather system. In the very top of these huge structures of out internal support, sometimes there would be lightning and little rain clouds up there. It's absolutely phenomenal. There was a time in the 30s, early 30s, when people in this country believed that airships were going to be the transportation of the future. It was cheap, it was quiet, and it took a few spectacular accidents, most of them with hydrogen-filled Zeppelins rather than helium, before that was given up. One of the problems with Zeppelins is that because they are lighter than air, though they're easy to maneuver, they're also easy to get out of control. And like a balloon, if a gust of wind comes along and the people who are trying to actually pull this thing in and moor it, if they don't watch out, it can be jerked away. The Zeppelin Factory. The Zeppelin Factory needed workers, all right. But standing in the cage of the whale's belly, sparks flying off the joints and noise thundering, Thomas wanted to sit right down and cry. That spring, the third largest airship was dubbed the biggest joke in town, though they all turned out for the launch. Wind caught. The Akron floated out of control, 3 men in tow. One dropped to safety, one hung on, but the third, muscles and adrenaline failing, fell clawing 600 feet. Thomas at night in the vacant lot. Here I am, intact and faint-hearted. Thomas hiding his heart with his hat at the football game, eyeing the Goodyear blimp overhead. Big boy, I know you're in there. The Depression hits in the 30s, and Thomas loses his job, but goes out looking for work every day. At least that's what Beulah thinks. What he really does is walk around. There isn't any work, and so he goes out and pretends. She's pregnant with their second child, and Thomas is hoping for a boy. They do end up having 4 girls, though, and by this point in the book we know that he's not going to get his boy. And this is from Beulah's point of view. Weathering out. She liked mornings the best. Thomas gone to look for work, her coffee flushed with milk, outside autumn trees blousy and dripping. Past the 7th month, she couldn't see her feet, So she floated from room to room, house shoes flapping, navigating corners in wonder. When she leaned against a door jamb to yawn, she disappeared entirely. Last week they had taken a bus at dawn to the new air dock. The hangar slid open in segments, and the Zeppelin nosed forward in its silver envelope. The man walked it out gingerly, like a poodle, then tied it to a mast and went back inside. Beulah felt just that large and placid, a lake. She glistened from cocoa butter smoothed in when Thomas returned every evening nearly in tears. He'd lean an ear on her belly and say, "Little fellow's really talking," though to her it was more the pock, pock, pock of a fingernail tapping a thick green lampshade. Sometimes during the night she woke and found him asleep there, and the child sleeping too. The coffee was good, but too little. Outside everything shivered in tin foil. Only the clover between the cobblestones hung stubbornly on, green as an afterthought. Anyone who's had children or has had to take care of children for any extended period of time knows that as much as you love them, there are moments when you want a few moments peace. In fact, you demand it, you need it. My mother confessed after I was grown and gone off to college, and she confessed to me that she used to go to sit in the parked car in the garage whenever we were too much for us, there were four of us, and just sit there for 10 minutes. And I remember those days when, we would be in the house in the summer usually, and we'd wonder, "Where's Mom? Where's Mom?" And she'd appear again, suddenly refreshed. Daystar. She wanted a little room for thinking, but she saw diapers steaming on the line, a doll slumped behind the door. So she lugged a chair behind the garage to sit out the children's naps. Sometimes there were things to watch: the pinched armor of a vanished cricket, a floating maple leaf. Other days she stared until she was assured when she closed her eyes she'd see only her own vivid blood. She had an hour at best before Liza appeared pouting from the top of the stairs. And just what was Mother doing out back with the field mice? Why, building a palace. Later that night, when Thomas rolled over and lurched into her, she would open her eyes and think of the place that was hers for an hour, where she was nothing, pure nothing, in the middle of the day. I'm going to make a grand leap in years now. Those very children are now grown enough that Beulah is able to take a job to help out with the family finances. And she gets a job in a dress shop. This is right around the 40s, mid-40s, something like that. The movie that year was Lauren Bacall and Humphrey Bogart's first appearance together. So they were an immediate sensation. Everyone was imitating them a couple of the years. That's the movie, and I can't remember the title now. But it's a movie when Lauren Bacall stops at the door and turns around, looks at Humphrey Bogart and says, "If you need me, just whistle. You know how to whistle, don't you? Put your lips together and blow." Right there. Thank you. It's great. Uh-oh. Dueling movies here. Okay. Beulah has always dreamed traveling. She always thought she was going to fly. She was like stepping off that roof. But also, her real dream was that she might get to Paris. And at this point in her life, she realizes that it's probably not going to happen. And so she's taken to reading about anything French in the public library. The great palaces of Versailles. Nothing nastier than a white person. She mutters as she irons alterations in the back room of Charlotte's dress shop. The steam rising from a cranberry wool comes alive with perspiration and stale evening of Paris. Swamp she born from, swamp she swallow, swamp she got to sink again. The iron shoves gently into a gusset, waits until the puckers bloom away. Beyond the curtain, the white girls are all wearing shoulder pads to make their faces delicate. That laugh would be Autumn tossing her hair in imitation of Bacall. Beulah had read in the library how French ladies at court would tuck their fans in a sleeve and walk in the gardens for air. Swaying among lilies, lifting shy layers of silk, they dropped excrement as daintily as handkerchiefs. Against all rules, she had saved the lining from a botched coat to face last year's gray skirt. She knows whenever she lifts a knee, she flashes crimson. That seems legitimate. But in the book she had read how the Cavalier amused themselves wearing powder and perfume and spraying yellow borders knee-high on the stucco of the orangerie. A hanger clatters in the front of the shop. Beulah remembers how even Autumn could lean into a settee with her ankles crossed, sighing, "I need a man who'll protect me," while smoking her cigarette down to the very end. Let's go back to Thomas for a moment. It's about a little bit later in years now, about the 60s, early 60s. Thomas is telling stories to his grandchildren. Now, we know that he didn't have a son, and then he proceeded to have lots of granddaughters too, and he finally gets his grandson. So he's telling stories to both the granddaughters and the grandson, but his stories are really for the apple of his eye, Malcolm. Stories that grandparents or any older person tells us. What was so wonderful about the ones that my grandparents told me when I was too young to know what I was getting, was that sometimes I thought they were rambling. Sometimes I thought they had changed the subject, which they would just get on with it. And it wasn't until 15 years down the line, I would suddenly go, that's what they meant. These little lessons buried in the stories. There's a few things you need to know before I read this poem, things which have occurred earlier in the book. One of them is a reference to an encyclopedia called the Werner Encyclopedia. Now, the Werner Encyclopedia was published in 1909 in Akron, Ohio. The only reason I know this is because I was in Arizona, where I lived at the time, and I was checking through the books at the Salvation Army, and I saw this this encyclopedia from Akron, Ohio, all except for one volume. That's why it was there. And I didn't know that they had ever printed a book in Akron, Ohio. And so I knew I had to have it. Seriously, it's not a literary town. But it's a beautiful encyclopedia when they really know how to make books. And what was fascinating about it, I bought it as a curiosity, but then I began to leaf through it. And what was absolutely fascinating about this encyclopedia is what people believed was true enough to put down in black and white. Some of those things are in the poem as well. And there's a reference in the poem to Thomas's hometown, Montrose, Tennessee, home of the Tennessee walking horse. If you don't know what the Tennessee walking horse is, you'll find out a little bit about it in the poem. Roast possum. The possum's a greasy critter that lives on persimmons in what the Bible calls carrion. So much from the 1909 Werner Encyclopedia, 3 rows of deep green along the wall. A granddaughter propped on each knee, Thomas went on with his tale. But it was for Malcolm, little red delicious, that he invented embellishments. We shined that possum with a torch, and I shinnied up, being the smallest, to shake him down. He glared at me, teeth bared like a shark's in that torpedo snout. Man, he was tough, but no match for old-time know-how. Malcolm hung back, studying them with his gold hawk eyes. When the girls got restless, Thomas talked horses. Strolling Jim, who could balance a glass of water on his back and trot the village square without spilling a drop. Who put Wartrace on the map and was buried under a stone like a man. They liked that part. He could have gone on to tell them that the Werner admitted Negro children to be intelligent, though briskness clouded over at puberty, bringing indirection and laziness. Instead, he added, "You got to be careful with a possum when he's on the ground. He'll turn on his back and play dead till you give up looking. That's what you'd call sullen." Malcolm interrupted to ask who owned Strolling Jim and who paid for the tombstone. They stared each other down, man to man, before Thomas, as a grandfather, replied, "Yes, sir, we enjoyed that possum. We ate him real slow with sweet potatoes." Just a couple more poems from Thomas Gill, and then I'd like to get on to newer things. I think just one more. This is the last poem in the book. My grandmother, in the last years of her life, contracted glaucoma, which, as most of you probably know, is an eye disease which usually can be controlled with drops. It's a pressure on the eyeball, resulting in tunnel vision and eventual blindness. My grandmother had drops, but she didn't believe in them, and so she didn't take them and took to her bed instead. She had a wonderful jewelry box that I coveted as a child. I thought it was the most original jewelry box in the world. Only years later I discovered there must have been about 500,000 in it. But it was very special to me, and it was at that period, it was made during that time when all things Oriental were fascinating to American designers. And so it was black lacquer, and when you opened it up, there was a Oriental dancer. The Oriental ballerina twirls on the tips of a carnation while the radio scratches out a morning hymn. Daylight has not ventured as far as the windows. The walls are still dark, shadowed with the ghosts of oversized gardenias. The ballerina pirouettes to the wheeze of the old rugged cross. She lifts her shoulders past the edge of the jewel box lid. 2 pink slippers touch the ragged petals. No one should have feet that small. In China, they do everything upside down. This ballerina has not risen, but drilled a tunnel straight to America, where the bedrooms of the poor are papered in vulgar flowers on a background the color of grease, of tea bags, of cracked imitation walnut veneer. On the other side of the world, they are shedding robes sprigged with roses, roses drifting with a hiss to the floor by the bed, as here the sun finally strikes the windows, suddenly opaque, non-committal as shields. In this room is a bed where the sun has gone walking, where a straw nods over the lip of its glass and a hand reaches for a tissue, crumpling it to a flower. The ballerina has been drilling all night. She flaunts her skirts like sails, whirling in a disk so bright, so rapidly she is standing still. The sun walks the bed to the pillow and pauses for breath. In the Orient, breath floats like mist in the fields. Hesitating at a knotted handkerchief that has slid on its string and has lodged beneath the right ear which discerns the most fragile music where there is none. The ballerina dances at the end of a tunnel of light. She spins on her impossible toes. The rest is shadow. The head on the pillow sees nothing else, though it feels the sun warming its cheeks. There is no china, no cross, just the papery kiss of a Kleenex above the stink of camphor, the walls exploding in shabby tutus. No way to make a transition, so I'm just going to wait for a second. I was asked this afternoon if I was going to talk about how I began writing, and I don't know, I said that I really don't know what will come out of my mouth when I'm standing up there, so I couldn't promise anything. But I thought about it because it's a question I've been asked before, and there are a few answers that I usually give. But then I began thinking about what really is the point where one starts to write, because I think you begin to write in your head, or you begin to have the, not the attitude, but the apprehension, not in the sense of dread, but apprehending things, seeing things. You begin to develop that earlier, actually earlier than speech, I think. And so I began thinking of certain moments in my life where something clicked, the moments of perception. And I realized that most of these times when this happened in my early life happened with math, not with poetry. It's math because though math has all of those wonderful symbols and things come out, either they come out right or wrong, at least in the early stages of math. It sometimes requires a great act of imagination to even begin to take the numbers seriously and see where they can lead you. And there were two cases of that in my life that I've written poems about because they were so fascinating to me. One of them happened when I approached geometry and had to imagine planes that went on forever and lines that had no dimension. And another one happened much earlier when I was being drilled in flashcards. It's kind of a negative epiphany, I think. The problem with flashcards is that you can never get better than they. And I still have nightmares about it. Now my daughter, who's 9, is doing flashcards. And I read her this poem and she said, "So, does that mean I don't have to do them?" Sorry. This means I feel for you while I flash them. And it's a sonnet. Flashcards. In math, I was the whiz kid, keeper of oranges and apples. What you don't understand, master, my father said. The faster I answered, the faster they came. I could see one bud on the teacher's geranium, one clear bee sputtering at the wet pane. The tulip trees always dragged after heavy rain, so I tucked my head as my boots slapped home. My father put up his feet after work and relaxed with a highball and the life of Lincoln. After supper we drilled, and I climbed the dark before sleep, before a thin voice hissed numbers as I spun on a wheel. I had to guess. 10, I kept saying. I'm only 10. 10 was a big year for me. That was also the year that I went down to the South for the first time, to Georgia, and then on to Florida, visiting cousins that I never knew I had, fourth and fifth cousins, very far removed. But it was my first experience with a segregated beach, this in Fort Myers in 1962. It was also my first experience with crabs, with eating boiled crabs and lobsters, and I didn't realize you put them in alive. Crab boil, Fort Myers, 1962. Why do I remember the sky above the forbidden beach? Why only blue and the scratched shell on tin of their distress? The rest imagination supplies, bucket and angry pink beseeching claws. Why does Aunt Helen laugh before saying, look at that, a bunch of niggers, not a one get out for the others pulling back? I don't believe her, just as I don't believe they won't come and chase us back to the colored-only shore, crisp with litter and broken glass. When do we kill them? Kill them? Hell, the water does that. They don't feel a thing, no nervous system. I decide to believe this. I'm hungry. Dismantled, they're merely exotic, a blushing meat. After all, she has grown old in the South. If we're kicked out now, I'm ready. I'm going to... I'd like to read you a couple of poems that deal with the mother-daughter relationship. These poems had a very curious beginning because I was talking with a friend of mine, a photographer, who taught at Arizona State where I was teaching at the time. And we had decided we wanted to do something together, but we wanted to do something that was completely different, of course. And we didn't want a coffee table thing. I didn't want to write poems to her images or have illustrate my poems. And so we spent a lot of days sitting around doing nothing, looking at each other saying, what are we going to do? And finally, out of desperation, and I think utter exhaustion, because we found ourselves sitting very often in my backyard over cups of coffee with our calendars, trying to figure out when we had time to really meet again and do this. And out of desperation, she began to take photographs of my backyard. That's where we always were. And my daughter, who was 3 at that time, I think, wandered into one of these photographs and spoiled the composition. But of course, she didn't really spoil it. And when we saw the contact prints of this, I think we both realized simultaneously that that was our subject. Our subject was this backyard, but it was also children in it and how they walk into our lives. So this poem, this first poem I'll read is called Pastoral, and it's about breastfeeding. Pastoral. Like an otter, but warm, she latched onto the shadowy tip, and I watched, diminished by those amazing gulps. Finished, she let her head loll, eyes unfocused and large, milk drunk. I liked afterwards best, lying outside on a quilt, her new skin spread out like meringue. I felt then what a young man must feel with his first love asleep on his breast. Desire and the freedom to imagine it. My daughter was about 3. She began to hang all of her dolls with any kind of string or that you could find, yarn. We had not allowed any toy guns or anything like swords or anything like that in the house. She made up her own way. I think it's essential. It's an essential part of childhood to try to get some kind of control over this confusing world that we're thrust into. But it was disconcerting. The breathing, the endless snooze. Every god is lonely, an exile composed of parts, elk-horn, cloven hoof. Receptacle for wishes, each god is empty without us, penitent, raking our yards into wind-blown piles. Children know this. They are the trailings of gods. Their eyes hold nothing at birth, then fill slowly with the myth of ourselves. Not so the dolls, out for the count, each toe pouting from the slumped-over toddler clothes, no blossoming there. So we give our children dolls, and they know just what to do. Line them up and shoot them. With every execution, doll and God grow stronger. And this poem has an epigraph from a Marie Sendak book called Mickey in the Night Kitchen. After reading Mickey in the Night Kitchen for the third time before bed, I'm in the milk, and the milk's in me. I'm Mickey. My daughter spreads her legs to find her vagina. Hairless, this mistaken bit of nomenclature is what a stranger cannot touch without her yelling. She demands to see mine, and momentarily we're a lopsided star among the spilled toys, my prodigious scallops exposed to her neat cameo. And yet the same glazed tunnel, layered sequences. She is 3. That makes this innocent. We're pink, she shrieks and bounds off. Every month she wants to know where it hurts and what the wrinkled string means between my legs. This is good blood, I say, but that's wrong too. How to tell her that it's what makes us, black mother, cream child, that we're in the pink and the pink's in us. I heard that, I think this is the poem that Michael Harper must have read when he was here a few years back. It's dedicated to him, and I think he's done some of the most incredible homages to black musicians that are around. And this is another homage. Oh, Michael, for this one. He was also the person who told me that when he heard the title of the poem, he said, canary, you know, a canary is not only a female vocalist, that's what the female vocalist is often referred to in a jazz or blues combo or swing group. But he said, a canary is that bird that the miners take into the cave to test for gas leaks, poison gas leaks. And if the bird dies, they know that the shaft is not safe for men. That's Michael. Canary, from Michael Harper. Billie Holiday's burned voice had as many shadows as lights, a mournful candelabra against a sleek piano, the gardenia her signature under that ruined face. Now you're cooking, drummer to bass, magic spoon, magic needle. Take all day if you have to with your mirror and your bracelet of song. Fact is, the invention of women under siege has been to sharpen love in the service of myth. If you can't be free, be a mystery. I'm going to read, I'm not going to keep you forever, don't worry, but I would like to read a couple of new poems. Mainly because they began to be written right about this time. I had thought that I'd never write poems in form, more than the occasional one, and then I began writing a series of sonnets, which are all based on the Persephone Demeter myth, and I thought I'd never write about myths either, so there. What does the Henry Pigeon say in the American Tale, never say never? Yeah. So I'd like to read a couple of these sonnets. This one, some of them are very contemporary and have a very, very slight connection to the myth, so don't look for it. But this one is about Frida Kahlo, who is fantastic, was a fantastic artist, often known because she was the lifelong companion of Diego Rivera, but was an incredible artist in her own right. She had an accident when she was young, a bus accident where, which in a certain way, well, it did cripple her for life. She was in constant pain and couldn't bear children and had to wear a plaster cast. And so she decorated her cast, she painted her cast. Sonnet in primary colors. This is for the woman with one black wing perched over her eyes. Lovely Frida, erect among parrots in the stern petticoats of the peasant who painted herself a present. Wildflowers entwining the plaster corset her spine resides in, that flaming pillar, this priestess in the romance of mirrors. Each night she lay down in pain and rose to the celluloid butterflies of her beloved dead, Lenin and Marx and Stalin arrayed at the footstead, and rose to her easel the 100 dogs panting like children among the graveled walks of the garden, Diego's love, a skull in the circular window of the thumbprint searing her immutable brow. Persephone falling. One Narcissus among the ordinary beautiful flowers, one unlike all the others. She pulled, stooped to pull harder, when, sprung out of the earth on his glittering, terrible carriage, he claimed his due. It is finished. No one heard her, no one. She had strayed from the herd. Remember, go straight to school. This is important. Stop fooling around. Don't answer to strangers. Stick with your playmates. Keep your eyes down. This is how easily the pit opens. This is how one foot sinks into the ground. Missing. I am the daughter who went out with the girls, never checked back in, and nothing marked my last known whereabouts, not a single lavender petal. Horror is partial. It keeps you going. A lost child is a fact hardening around its absence, a knot in the breast purring, touch and I will come true. I was returned. I watched her watch as I babbled, it could have been worse. Who can tell what penetrates? Pity is the brutal discipline. Now I understand she can never die, just as nothing can bring me back. I am the one who comes and goes. I am the footfall that hovers. And I'll just read two more poems. Used is the title of this. I think that sometimes when professors or anyone that has a position of authority gives you something taboo, says that you cannot do this. That's what you're kind of doomed to do all your life and to find something. I remember that one of my first creative writing teachers, who was a fantastic teacher, had said one day as an aside, oh, you can't write about music, it's impossible. And of course my whole novel is about music. The other thing that I was told was that you couldn't write about, that you shouldn't use one-word titles. I don't know where that came from, but a lot of these sonnets have one-word titles. Every time I put it down, I go, ha, gosh. Used. The conspiracy is to make us thin. Size 3s are all the rage, and skirts ballooning above twinkling knees are every man-child's pre-adolescent dream. Tabula rasa, no slates that clean. We've earned the navel's sunken grief when the last child emptied us of their brief interior light. Our muscles say we have been used. Have you ever tried silk sheets? I did, persuaded by postnatal dread and a Macy's clerk to bargain for more zip. We couldn't hang on, slipped to the floor, and by morning, the quilts had slid off too. Enough of guilt. It's hard work staying cool. And this last poem is dedicated to all of the women in Paris that my grandmother would have seen if she'd had a chance to get there. In Paris, watching other people is a municipal sport, watching being watched. It's not impolite. In fact, part of the joy of being on the streets is to look at people and see how they carry themselves and to see if you yourself can bear up under the pressure of a gaze. And the women, I think, who did it the best were the women from the islands, from Guadeloupe, from Martinique, all of the French islands who somehow got stranded in that cold city. But they knew how to be looked at. The island women of Paris skim from curb to curb like regatta, from Pont Neuf to the Quai de la Harpe in cool negotiation with traffic, each a country to herself, transposed to this city by a fluke called imperial courtesy. The island women glide past, held aloft by a wire running straight to heaven. Who can ignore their ornamental bearing, turbans haughty as parrots, or deft braids carved into airy cages transfixed on their manifest brows? The island women move through Paris as if they had just finished inventing their destinations. It's better not to get in their way, and better not look an island woman in the eye, unless you like feeling unnecessary.